A mother and her two children inherit a derelict farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, after the father she never knew passes away. I did it. I managed to see Ghostbusters Afterlife without ever seeing a trailer or reading anything about the plot. In fact, I just found out about a week ago that Paul Rudd was in it. I lived and breathed Ghostbusters as a kid, so I didn't need to see a trailer that was going to ruin all the best parts to know that I was going to be there opening weekend to see it. That being said, you should probably take this review with a grain of salt because my nostalgic love for the Ghostbusters franchise has really tinted my rose-colored glasses in favor of this new movie. I had long given up hope that we were ever going to get a true sequel to the original two Ghostbusters movies. There have been talks of a third Ghostbusters movie since the early 1990s. Dan Aykroyd has had a script ready to go, but there was always something standing in the way from getting it done. Of course, Bill Murray has been very vocal about saying he didn't really want to participate, and then in 2014 when Harold Ramis passed away, all hope of a new movie was pretty much squashed at that point. But I was at least excited that back in 2009 there was a Ghostbusters video game released that was considered by many fans to be the third movie. It did feature the entire original voice cast and a truly original story, and it was actually a really good video game. So to me, that was the third movie. And then in 2016, of course, we got the all-female reboot of Ghostbusters, and I was there opening weekend to see it. In fact, I saw it twice on opening weekend, and I also bought the Blu-ray when it came out. So needless to say, I really enjoyed that 2016 Ghostbusters reboot. At the time, when that reboot came out, I would always tell people, hey, any new Ghostbusters is better than no new Ghostbusters, even if it isn't related at all to the original story. Ghostbusters Afterlife is the true sequel to the original film that I didn't know that I wanted or needed. Ghostbusters Afterlife is a sequel to the original 1984 movie. At least I think it is. We didn't get any reference to Vigo the Carpathian, or the River of Slime, or the time that the Statue of Liberty walked through downtown Manhattan. These are all things that happened in 1989's Ghostbusters 2. There were, however, a bunch of references to 1984's original Ghostbusters movie, but our young characters in this new movie had no idea of the events that took place in New York back in 1984. So how do they learn about it? They go to YouTube and they watch clips and commercials that are scenes taken from the original movie that kind of explain what has happened. And in one of the scenes, they are watching a YouTube video, and on the right-hand side, there's a list of related videos. One of them said, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man Cleanup 1984. I would love to watch that video if it truly existed. And one of the craziest things about this new Ghostbusters movie is it doesn't take place in New York City like the first two movies do, and that 2009 video game, and the 2016 reboot. I mean, Ghostbusters really is a New York movie. This movie takes place in Oklahoma, and you know what? It still works. The first two movies were directed by Ivan Reitman. This new movie, however, was not. It was directed by his son, Jason Reitman, who grew up on the sets of those first two movies, and in fact had a cameo in Ghostbusters 2 at the birthday party scene at the beginning of that movie. He is the kid who tells the Ghostbusters, my dad thinks you guys are full of crap. And because he was so closely related to those first two movies, and he grew up probably with that same nostalgic look at them that I grew up with, there was really no better person to make this movie. Now, Jason Reitman is not known for making blockbusters. In fact, I don't think he's ever made one. He makes smaller movies that more character studies. Think Juno or Up in the Air. And he brought some of those smaller character studies and the emotional relationships between them to this new Ghostbusters Afterlife movie. And honestly, I think that's what makes this a great movie. The original Ghostbusters was a little bit faster paced. It was a little bit funnier, took place in a big city, and it featured dozens, if not hundreds, of unique ghosts. Ghostbusters Afterlife, on the other hand, takes a little bit longer to get going, and instead of taking place in a big city, it takes place in the fictional small town of Summerville, Oklahoma. And for being a Ghostbusters movie, there really aren't a lot of ghosts in it, and that makes each sighting of a ghost that much more important. For the most part, I liked all of the new characters. Some of them I don't think got all the screen time that they deserve, but the movie's already 2 hours long, so they didn't want to make it any longer. Paul Rudd is featured in the movie and was recently voted the sexiest man alive, and from what I hear is one of the most likable guys in Hollywood. However, in every single scene in Ghostbusters Afterlife, he was outshined by 12-year-old actress Mckenna Grace. Seriously, this girl is gonna be a superstar. Several scenes from the original movie are redone here with bigger sound, better special effects, and probably the true vision of what Dan Aykroyd had originally thought of back in the 80s. But the way these scenes are redone, it never feels like a rehash of the original. There are reasons why things are happening the same way as they did back in the 80s. And the movie has a lot of humor in it. Mostly it's Mckenna Grace telling really bad dad jokes in a deadpan accent, doing her best Harold Ramis impersonation. But even though there are jokes and there is some humor in the movie, I don't really consider it a comedy. This is an adventure story much like Stranger Things or The Goonies or Stand By Me or even Super 8, where the kids kids are the stars of the movie and they are more than capable of carrying the entire plot on their shoulders. But I also got some Steven Spielberg vibes, mainly his 1980s movies that feature kids as the protagonists. Jason Reitman was really able to capture that same wonder, where the kids have that twinkle in their eye as they're really ramping up, learning how the world works, and then learning how to save the world. We also get a little bit more backstory on a character who was only briefly mentioned in the first movie. And while a lot of questions were answered in Ghostbusters Afterlife, I feel like just as many questions were left unanswered, and I really hope that they get answered in the sequel that I'm crossing my fingers gets greenlit soon. Multiple times throughout Ghostbusters Afterlife, I got goosebumps. I absolutely loved the big action scenes, and there was a car chase in the middle featuring the famous Ghostbusters car, the Ecto-1, with some interesting improvements that just put a smile on my face. And because Ghostbusters Afterlife came out in 2021, there is a lot of CGI in it. And while it was on the verge of being too much, I never felt like it crossed over into that territory. There were even a few scenes with an old villain from the original movie, and it was done so well that there were parts that I couldn't tell if it was CGI or practical effects. The climax of the movie is excellent, and there were some surprises I definitely wasn't expecting. The biggest surprise of the movie for me was that I cried a little bit. Yes, you heard me correctly. My eyes produced tears watching a movie about the Ghostbusters. Making a reboot, a remake, or a sequel is like walking a tightrope, especially when it is based on a beloved franchise that has a rabid fan base. If the movie is too close to the original, people are going to think it's a cheap ripoff. And if it's not close enough to the original, people think the filmmakers bought the naming rights to the movie just for name recognition to make a quick buck. But to me, Jason Reitman walked this tightrope perfectly. This is a must-see if you are a fan of the original movies. However, if you haven't seen the original movies or you have children who didn't grow up with the original movies, this is a great jumping off point. And hopefully, they'll like it enough to want to go back and revisit those originals. While it wasn't perfect, there were so many things in this movie that really just drove home what was so special about the original that captivated audiences nearly 40 years ago. It was a sentimental trip down memory lane that honors the original movie and its creators, while also paving way for a new audience to fall in love with the Ghostbusters and create a launching point for a new franchise. Applying for a job, driving without a license, experimenting with an unlicensed nuclear accelerator, first dates with the sexiest man alive, living in the middle of nowhere, retro diners, watching YouTube videos.